I was born into a family where reputation meant everything. We lived in a large house with shiny floors, expensive curtains, and cold hearts. My parents didn't raise us with love, they raised us with expectations. What school we went to, what friends we had, even who we were allowed to smile at. It all had to fit their idea of perfection. They were proud of their name, proud of their money, and very proud of their status in the community. But they were never proud of me, not for who I truly was. I always felt like I didn't belong. I wasn't as polished as my sisters, and I didn't care about designer bags or grand parties. I wanted simple things. Real things. Things that made my heart feel full, not just my closet. That's why when I met Daniel, everything changed. He wasn't from my world. He worked at a small repair shop and came home with grease on his hands and honesty in his smile. He wasn't rich, but he was real. The way he looked at me made me feel seen for the first time in my life. Not as the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Chambers, but as me, Emily. We talked for hours about dreams and fears. He listened and he never judged. I fell for him slowly, then all at once. When I told my family about him, I expected them to be surprised, but I wasn't ready for what came next. My father looked at me like I had spat in his face. My mother didn't say a word, just shook her head in disappointment. My older sister laughed. "A mechanic?" she said, like the word itself was dirty. I tried to defend him, to make them understand that he was kind, loyal, and hardworking. But they didn't want to hear it. One night over dinner, my father gave me an ultimatum. "If you marry him, you're dead to us. You'll no longer be our daughter." I remember the silence that followed. My fork froze mid-air. My throat tightened. My mother didn't object. Neither did my siblings. It was like they had already buried me. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the birthdays, holidays, and moments I'd lose if I walked away from them. But then I thought about Daniel. About how he held my hand when I cried. About how he smiled at me like I was his entire world. I realized I had to choose between fake love and real love. So I chose Daniel. We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. No family, no friends, just us and the belief that we were doing the right thing. When I sent them a photo from our wedding day, there was no reply. Not even a single message. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. No calls. No emails. No one came to visit. My siblings blocked me on everything. It was like I had never existed. I was cut off completely. No inheritance, no family name, nothing. Some nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had made a mistake. Wondering if love was enough to fill the space left behind by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The silence from them was louder than any words they had ever said. But every time Daniel wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We'll build our own family," I found a little more strength to keep going. I had lost my blood, but I hadn't lost my heart. Our new life began in a one-bedroom apartment with chipped paint, a leaking faucet, and walls so thin we could hear the neighbors arguing every night. The kitchen was barely big enough to fit 2 people, and the bed creaked every time we turned. But it was ours. It wasn't a palace, but it held our hopes, and that made it feel like home. Daniel worked long hours at the repair shop, sometimes 12, even 14 hours a day. He'd come home with sore muscles, oil-stained clothes, and tired eyes, but he always smiled at me like I was the reward at the end of his day. I tried not to complain even when I was lonely. Even when the lights flickered and I had to warm soup on a single burner because the stove wasn't working properly. I knew I had to help, so I started looking for work. At first it was small things, typing work from home, data entry for a friend's startup. Then I began cleaning offices in the evening. I'd leave just before sunset and come back when Daniel was already asleep. The money wasn't much, but it helped pay for groceries and kept the lights on. I remember holding every dollar like it was gold. We learned to budget down to the last cent, cutting coupons and skipping meals some nights just to make rent. Even in those difficult times, there were moments of laughter. We'd eat dinner on the floor, watching old movies on his laptop. Sometimes we danced in our tiny living room, barefoot and broke but in love. We dreamed about the future while staring at the ceiling, wondering when things would change. But not everyone found our story beautiful. My relatives, especially my aunt, became the messengers of my family's cruelty. She would call me now and then, not to ask how I was, but to pass on messages wrapped in fake concern. "Your parents saw your wedding photo. They said you looked tired and poor," she once said, chuckling like it was a joke. "They said you traded diamonds for dust." Every time I heard those words, something inside me cracked. The family I once begged for affection now mocked me from afar. They had washed their hands of me but still took pleasure in watching me struggle. The worst part was, some days their words found a place in my mind. I'd stare at the mirror and wonder if I really did look tired, if I really had made the biggest mistake of my life. One night, after a long day of cleaning 3 offices and walking home in the rain, I broke down. I sat on the kitchen floor, soaking wet, holding my soaked shoes in one hand and the little cash I earned in the other. I didn't even realize I was crying until Daniel rushed to me. He knelt beside me, cupped my face gently, and wiped away my tears with his rough thumb. "I'm so tired, Daniel," I whispered, my voice barely coming out. "Sometimes I think maybe they were right. Maybe I was stupid to throw everything away." He didn't flinch. He didn't argue or try to shut me up. He just pulled me into his arms and held me there for what felt like forever. I could feel his heart beating steadily against mine. "Emily," he said softly, looking into my eyes, "you didn't throw anything away. You chose love over pride. You chose truth over show. And one day, I swear to you, one day I'll make you proud. And I'll make them regret every word they ever said about you." His words didn't fix everything. We still had bills to pay. We still lived in a cramped apartment. But something inside me shifted that night. I realized that my pain didn't come from our life together. It came from holding on to the rejection that still haunted me. From that night on, I stopped trying to prove anything to the people who gave up on me. I decided to believe in the man who chose me when I had nothing to offer but love, and in myself for being brave enough to choose him. A few months after that night, I broke down in the kitchen. Something shifted in Daniel. He began coming home with more ideas than complaints. Every evening, as we ate our simple dinners, usually rice and beans or noodles with whatever vegetables were on sale, he would talk about starting something of his own. At first, I thought it was just a dream, something he said to lift our spirits. But then he started putting money aside. Just a few dollars every week, hidden in an old cookie tin on the top shelf of our closet. After nearly a year of saving, Daniel officially started his own small repair service. It wasn't grand, just him, his old toolbox, and a second-hand van we bought with part of our savings. He called it Daniel's Fix-It, and offered affordable home repairs, plumbing, electrical, and basic carpentry. He handed out flyers door to door, fixed things for neighbors at low prices, and always refused tips from the elderly. Word spread quickly. Not because of fancy advertising but because of how he treated people. Clients loved him. They said he reminded them of a time when people did honest work for fair prices. He'd show up on time, explain every detail of the job, and never overcharge. Some customers started calling him back for every little thing, even things he didn't officially offer. He never said no. He just learned how to do it. While he worked with his hands, I handled the rest. I kept track of his clients in a small notebook, managed basic accounting, and helped with scheduling over phone and email. It wasn't much, but we felt like a team. And it felt good, really good, to be building something of our own, something that wasn't handed to us but earned with sweat and late nights. We were still careful with money, but life didn't feel as heavy anymore. After a few steady months, we moved into a slightly bigger apartment. It wasn't luxury by any means, but it had 2 bedrooms, brighter walls, and a working heater. I cried the day we moved in, not out of sadness but because it felt like the first real step forward. We even bought a small second-hand dining table and invited over a few of Daniel's clients who had become our friends. It wasn't a lavish housewarming, but it was filled with laughter and warmth, things my old family home never really had. Our bond deepened in those days. I watched Daniel grow from a man with calloused hands to a man people respected and trusted. And he never once let success change the way he treated me. In fact, the better life got, the more he appreciated me. He'd leave me sweet notes before heading out to work. He'd randomly bring home my favorite snacks or just sit and rub my feet after a long day. I started to believe again, not just in him but in us. We were still far from the life my family thought I'd thrown away. But I had peace. I had love. And slowly I was getting my confidence back. Still, the occasional message from relatives would find its way to me, often through someone trying to play both sides. One cousin sent me a message saying, "Your parents said it's sad to see you wasting your life. They said you used to have class, now you clean floors and live with a handyman." I didn't reply. I didn't even get angry anymore. I had learned to expect their ignorance. What hurt more was knowing that while Daniel was building something beautiful with his bare hands, my family was still stuck behind their pride, judging a life they knew nothing about. They hadn't reached out in any real way. Not one apology. Not one honest attempt to understand. Just more smug silence. But deep down I knew something they didn't. They thought I had fallen but I was growing. They thought I had failed but I was finally learning what success really meant. And this time, no matter how far we had to go, I was walking beside someone who never made me feel small. It all started with a single email. Daniel had been fixing up office furniture for a small law firm downtown when one of the partners took notice. Not just of his work but his professionalism. She asked him to submit a proposal to handle regular maintenance for all their properties. At first we didn't think much of it. He'd had offers before that didn't lead anywhere. But this one was different. 2 weeks later we received confirmation. Daniel's company had been awarded a year-long contract covering maintenance for 5 commercial buildings. It was more than anything we'd handled before. Suddenly we were getting calls from other firms who had heard about the quality of his work. Daniel's Fix-It was no longer just a man with a toolbox. It was becoming a real business. We moved quickly. Rented a small office in a business park, hired 2 technicians and bought better equipment. I quit all my side jobs and joined full-time. I handled operations, payroll, customer relations, basically everything that didn't require a wrench. It was hectic and some days we worked until midnight, but the growth was thrilling. Every week there was something new. A bigger project, a new employee, a better client. But nothing could have prepared us for what happened next. One morning while going through the list of upcoming contract bids, I saw a familiar name. My father's company. I stared at the screen in disbelief, double-checking the details. It was a massive project. Complete facility maintenance for a chain of retail outlets. The file said my father's company had been struggling and was outsourcing services to reduce costs. There was a short list of companies bidding for the contract, and we were on it. I didn't tell Daniel right away. My hands were trembling as I closed the file. It felt surreal. For years, my family had acted like we didn't exist, like we had nothing to offer. And now, without even knowing it, they were about to sit across a table from us, begging for a service we had built from scratch. When I finally told Daniel, he didn't react the way I thought he would. He didn't laugh or gloat. He simply said, "Let's give them the best offer we've ever written." Nothing more, nothing less. That was the kind of man he was. Always respectful, always focused on the work, not the ego. Still, something inside me stirred. I couldn't help but think back to the way my father had looked at Daniel the last time we were all in the same room. Like he was a stain. Like he wasn't worthy of even speaking to him. Now Daniel might become his boss. He might end up with the power to decide how my father's company would survive. They didn't even know it yet. And I wasn't sure how I felt. There was pride, of course. A deep, overwhelming pride in the man I had chosen. But there was also a strange ache in my chest. The same people who disowned me, who mocked our struggles, were about to find out that the life they dismissed had become something powerful. Something they needed. It felt like the world was coming full circle. It happened on a Thursday evening. I still remember the exact time, 6:42 p.m., when I walked through the grand glass doors of the event center, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The invitation had arrived through a mutual business contact and was addressed to Mrs. Olivia Carter, Operations Director, Fix-It Group. They had no idea who I was. Not really. Just a name on paper. Just a company on the rise. It was a corporate gala, a networking event tied to a charity auction. My father's company was listed as one of the sponsors. I wore a simple but elegant black dress, the kind that made me feel both confident and composed. As I walked through the crowd, nodding politely and shaking hands, I spotted them. My family. My mother, still poised and proper, surrounded by women in designer gowns. My brother, laughing with men in suits, clearly trying to impress. And my father, standing near the main stage, speaking to someone who looked like a board member. They didn't recognize me at first. It had been years and I had changed, not just in appearance but in presence. I carried myself differently now. I wasn't the girl who used to silently shrink into the background while my family talked over her. I was someone who had faced the world and built a life from the ashes of rejection. But the moment their eyes landed on me, everything stopped. My mother's smile froze. My brother's laugh died halfway through. My father narrowed his eyes, his mouth twitching like he wasn't sure whether to frown or act pleased. The confusion on their faces was almost theatrical. You could see the questions flashing in their eyes. Is that Olivia? What is she doing here? Why is she on the guest list? I didn't say anything. I just offered a soft, polite nod, the kind strangers give at events like these. And then Daniel walked in. Wearing a sharp, tailored suit, confident as ever, he was announced as Daniel Carter, CEO of Fixit Group, our newest partner in the corporate sustainability initiative. A round of applause followed as he made his way to the stage to give a brief speech about ethical growth and community-driven business. My father's face turned pale. You could almost hear the sound of his pride cracking. He looked from Daniel to me, and it was like watching a man realize he'd burned a bridge he desperately needed to cross. My mother turned away, pretending to sip from an empty champagne glass. My brother stood motionless, jaw clenched, unable to process what was unfolding in front of him. After the speech, as the room buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking glasses, my father approached me. He waited until I was alone, away from the crowd. "Olivia," he said gently, like the years of silence never happened. "I didn't know. I had no idea you were doing all of this." I looked at him, really looked at him. He seemed smaller than I remembered. Older. Tired. He tried to smile. "You've done well. Both of you. I was wrong to judge so quickly." I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just stood there quiet and still. And when he was done, I nodded once. "Thank you for saying that." But I didn't forgive him. Not yet. Because forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a reaction. It's a decision. One that takes more than just words in a moment of discomfort. And I wasn't ready. As I stood in that room watching my father and the awkward attempts at reconciliation, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led me here. It felt like a lifetime ago when they had thrown me out, claiming that love wasn't enough. That the man I chose to marry, Daniel, with his rough hands and humble roots, was beneath me. Back then they believed that money and status were the only things that mattered. But now I was standing in a room full of people who respected me, who admired Daniel and me for what we'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me. When my family finally realized that they had disowned me for love, they tried to rebuild the bridge they'd burned. Slowly but surely my phone began to ring with messages from them. At first it was a simple, "How are you?" text followed by more apologies. My mother even reached out to me through my aunt, saying she missed me and wanted to make amends. But I had learned a hard lesson in all this. Forgiveness for me couldn't be rushed. It wasn't something I could offer out of duty or guilt. It had to be earned. I wasn't that young girl anymore, desperate for their approval. I had found peace, real peace, in my own choices. And my family's acceptance was no longer the prize I sought. One evening my brother called me. He was in town for a business meeting, he said, and asked if I could come over to their house for a family dinner. It wasn't much of a surprise. My parents had been hinting for weeks that they wanted to reconnect. But I wasn't eager to jump back into old patterns. I agreed though, because life had taught me to be gracious and to stand firm in my choices. As I pulled into their driveway that evening, the house looked the same as I remembered. Large, pristine, the kind of home that screamed wealth but lacked warmth. I was no longer the girl who stood in awe of it. Now it was just a house. A house that held memories of rejection, but also of a life I had long since moved beyond. They greeted me at the door with forced smiles, too aware of the tension that lingered between us. My mother asked how I was doing, my father tried to make small talk, but there was something painfully awkward in the air. They were trying too hard. I could see it in their eyes. The regret, the realization that their actions had pushed me away, but also the confusion of what to do next. But I didn't feel any bitterness anymore. I had learned how to let go. The woman who walked through their front door wasn't the daughter they once knew. I wasn't there to beg for their approval, nor was I there to prove anything to them. I was there as a guest in my own past, visiting a life that no longer defined me. Dinner was quiet. The conversation was polite, distant. They kept asking about Daniel, about the business. They were curious, but I could sense they didn't truly understand it. They didn't understand what it had taken for us to get here. How much sacrifice, how many sleepless nights, how many moments of doubt we had to face together. They couldn't see the strength in us because they were too focused on what they thought we lacked. After dinner, as I stood to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "We'd like to be a part of your life again," she said. "We want to make things right." I didn't respond immediately. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a deep sadness. They still didn't get it. It wasn't about being a part of my life. It was about respecting the life I had chosen. A life built on love, not money. I appreciate that, I said calmly. But things have changed. I've changed. And then I left. As I drove away from that house, I felt lighter than I had in years. They had thrown me out for marrying love. But it was that love, the kind that had nothing to do with wealth or status, that had brought me everything they couldn't give me. Peace, purpose, and the strength to stand tall on my own. They never truly understood that. But I did. And that was enough. I had built a life they would never have imagined, not because of money, not because of their approval, but because I chose the one thing they couldn't offer me. Love in its truest form. And in the end, love had brought me everything they had never believed I could achieve.